Hello there, I'm Callum and welcome to the EU in Review, where I review the Star Wars Expanded Universe as I experience it. This time I'm going to be talking about the Truce at Bakura, written by Kathy Tyers. And this is interesting as the first book set after Return of the Jedi properly, because in my last review I reviewed Hard Merchandise that finishes at the same time as Return of the Jedi finishes. So, I'll get to reading the blurb. No sooner has Darth Vader's funeral pyre burnt to ashes on Endor than the Rebel Alliance intercepts a call for help from a far-flung Imperial outpost. Bakura is on the edge of known space and the first to meet the Sea Rook, cold-blooded reptilian invaders who are approaching Imperial space with only one goal: total domination. Princess Leia sees the mission as a chance to achieve a diplomatic victory for the Alliance, but the mission assumes even greater importance when a vision of Obi-Wan Kenobi appears to Luke Skywalker with the message that he must go to Bakura, or risk losing everything the rebels have fought so desperately to achieve. Even as the Alliance arrives, the aliens have almost overcome the Bakura Imperial garrison, whose desperate commander will accept help from any quarter against an insidious foe that enslaves human minds to pilot their invincible machines of war and destruction. While marshalling the tattered Imperial forces, Luke, Han Solo, and Princess Leia must win the trust and cooperation of the Bakurans. For although the rebels have been granted temporary amnesty, there is the risk of treachery amongst those whose first allegiance lies with the Empire. On the eve of the final explosive onslaught, Rebel and Imperial forces must at last come to terms with each other, or lose the entire galaxy to the hideous servitude promised by a victorious alien enemy. So that's a bit longer blurb than each of the books of the Bounty Hunter Wars trilogy had, which are my last three AU reviews. But yeah, it's cool. You're getting more information than some blurbs and less than others. So I'll get straight into my little notes. So they use crystals for decor on Bakura, and they say they're from an elegance age. So I'm imagining them similar to crystals in a lightsaber, because of Obi-Wan's quote, and a lightsaber is an elegant weapon from a more civilized age, and that lines up for me that they use similar sorts of crystals from an elegance age. And it also says that Mon Mothma founded the Rebel Alliance, when later material has her as one of the founders. I think that it's a thing that it might be one person's perspective, or she actually got credit for most of it, as she basically became the public face of it when the rebellion was founded. It alludes to Luke wanting a relationship with Leia in the past, which is cool because that ties it back to Splinter of the Mind's Eye especially, and then later novels seem to have skirted around that Luke and Leia were actually sexually attracted to each other until they realised they were brother and sister. The species of goat filling the Force is a vague buzzing. It mentions that little detail. I thought it is interesting, as it says Luke has to tone down his presence in the Force a bit to not give them a headache, which is cool. I love how the Rebel Alliance as well gives the Ewoks medical care after Return of the Jedi. In this, it actually says that they have an Ewok in the med bay, which is cool. And this is one of the major things. It's the first appearance of the Sea Rook species in the novels. I'm not sure about the comics, that's why I say in the novels, but I've read through chronologically, personally, from Dawn of the Jedi Into the Void, and then my series has started with Allegiance, and now I'm up to the Truce At Bakura, which is cool. But it's the first time the Sea Rook have appeared in the novels, that I remember anyway, of course. I thought that taking the human energies and putting them into droids and to power control sections of the technology is really interesting as an idea, and it really works well in how they explain it. It might sound bad. I think a lot of things sound like bad ideas when you just say them out straight like that, but then when you read it, it really makes sense. And having a human serving the Sea Rook offers a nice perspective. And you get a really good perspective with that because he's brainwashed as well. So you get through this human serving the Sea Rook, his name is Dev Sibwara, you get an understanding of the Sea Rook culture in a different way, and it offers a really good perspective on that to understand how everything works there. And it sounds like this Dev Sibwara has an interesting past, which it does explain a bit in this, but it'd be cool to have a story written about it. If one exists, someone can let me know. Han calls Luke Jr., so I'm pretty sure that's an Indiana Jones reference. Don't call me Junior. Of course, he's Henry Jones Jr. in Indiana Jones. I like the explanation into what Leia thinks of Vader as her father and how it really tackles the issue of Leia trying to reconcile that the person who committed all the atrocities, Alderaan, was her father. And she still grieves for Alderaan in parts as well. And a funny bit was Han trying to woo Leia because they've got their relationship really starting up more after Return of the Jedi. And he gets Chewbacca to set up something in the Falcon, which is like a bed and some wine sort of thing. And it's really funny. You gotta read it. It's great. It's great to read Luke feeling conflicted about killing the presences inside of the droid starfighters, and then figuring out how it works and reconciling himself to the fact that these are human souls that he's actually freeing them by destroying the starfighters and the droids and everything. And while doing that, I think Luke uses a small form of battle meditation. If you don't know what that is, battle meditation first appeared in the Thrawn trilogy, or use of Joruus C'baoth, I think is the correct pronunciation. The clone of Jorus C'baoth. And one of the most well-known practitioners is Bastila Shan. And Luke actually reaches out from the minds of inside of the droids, the human energy, the soul anyway, and manipulates it to commit kamikaze. So that's interesting. And that's the appearance of an Imperial Governor in this. His name is Willick Nereus. But I mentioned him first here because I thought it was interesting that he has black helmeted naval stormtroopers. I imagine very similar to stormtroopers but in black armour. That actually seems like something from all the way back here that they've included in some of the new canon. I do mention that slightly in this, and that they use Imperial Governors in persons of note are protected by black stormtroopers, basically. It's also interesting, there's a character in this called Epi Belden, and she's actually at the age of 132, and she's still deemed a bit younger than the normal life expectancy. So it could be Bakuran years, but it's most likely more for our point of reference. It's the standard years. It's more because of advanced medical technology that they are able to survive that bit longer. And Leia's kept her braids from what she wore in Return of the Jedi, which is cool. It's a little detail I noticed. And Leia also wished Luke looked older in one part. That's on page 79. She says that. And it's actually probably, I would say that's a reference to the original script, with Luke Skywalker being Luke Starkiller and looking like the old Obi-Wan sort of figure, which is really cool. The wizened old Jedi General being Luke instead of Obi-Wan, which is cool. Han Solo was a big green alien as well, but yeah. And all the politics and the diplomacy with Leia is quite interesting. Between trying to forge a bit of a truce between the Imperials and the Rebels, and them trying to win the hearts of the Bakuran people, and going into all the atrocities that the Empire has done to those people to try and maintain control. It's really good. Anyway, it's quite interesting how they convey it all throughout the story. Of note, Leia wears a white senatorial gown that I reckon must, from the description, sounds very much, or if not pretty much exactly like her one in The New Hope, or the original Star Wars. It mentions it directly as well. It's really cool that this makes the Rebels and the Imperials work together against a common enemy. I think this is the first novel to do that, the first story in the expanded universe. Because this was published in 1994, yep, it has 1994 here. And I think all the stories before then that I know of were all Empire versus Rebels, and a lot of the comics were very similar in a lot of ways to each other with that. And on to the next thing, Luke's captivation with Gabriel Captison is quite amusing as well, because he keeps getting distracted by a Force presence is the main thing that it says. Right, because that's cool. And they do a great job of going back to Dev Sibwara. They do a great job of having that slave role where he gets it renewed. So renewal is there re-brainwashing him. But he slowly breaks through during the novel, which is awesome. There's a great subplot there for him. And Luke Skywalker doubting himself is really good as well, because he's full of confidence in Return of the Jedi, but then it goes from him right to the next part, him doubting why he even came to Bakura, and if he will fail and fall because he knows the Jedi are not invincible. This book does really well as well in the anti-alien sentiment in the Empire and tackling that issue, because of course the Rebel Alliance has aliens in their ranks, because they're working together. There's a bit of that tension, and there's an event that takes place that you can read it to find out that really tackles the issue well. I think really shows it for what it is. Also, this book is one of the few times in the expanded universe that Anakin Skywalker has appeared as a Force ghost. Now, by the description, he sounds like Sebastian Shaw Force Ghost, not Hayden Christensen, but it does say he looks a bit younger with dark hair instead of any grey hair. And it's great, going back to an earlier point, how he appears to Leia, and Leia is confronted with her hatred of Vader and trying to reconcile that with him being her father, which is cool. So an interesting point as well is that on page 186, it says, this is talking about Gabriel Captison. She drew on the Force like anyone else, though she couldn't accept it. So she couldn't accept it because they go into this whole thing with her as well, this religion that she hates Jedi because of her religion, which I think is a really cool thing as well. And also on the note of that quote that I was going to talk about properly was that everyone is connected to the Force and everyone influences the Force in certain ways, which I think is really what the Force is about. And she also has mismatched eyes. I forget the name for the condition. But the other character of note that has the mismatched eyes is Izan Izard, which is interesting to think that Gabriel Captison also has a similar condition. And then on page 189, because it's still that same conversation with Gabriel Captison, Luke says a great piece on why the Jedi should exist. Basically questioning and saying that there will always be people who are strong for evil. If the only way to protect others is for a few of us to become strong in the Force for good, isn't that important? Even if your beliefs are correct, and that meant bringing someone else low, because they believe when someone becomes powerful in the Force, it causes suffering for someone else. In her religion, and it explains. People constantly sacrifice themselves for good causes. I didn't ask anyone to die for me. Which is really cool. And he also says that if he didn't start on the path, the journey to becoming a Jedi, that he would actually have died. Pretty sure he died, and everyone else still would have died. So it's actually the best outcome for him to become a Jedi. The talk between soon after this is the talk between Luke and Leia's brother and sister, and they talk about the future a bit, which is quite accurate, really, because they say about Leia's children will be strong in the Force and have a big impact on the galaxy, and that's especially accurate considering what happens later in the expanded universe timeline. I thought this was also quite interesting that Governor Nereus actually planted parasites inside of Luke to try and kill him over time when they hatched, which I think is a cool idea compared to just trying to blast him, and it adds an extra layer of depth to the issues that Luke has to deal with in the climax of the novel, which I love. Leia does get some action as well, which is awesome, as she gets arrested. But she has her own action scenes, as well as being the diplomat, which is cool. Or scene, I should say. And becoming being the badass we know she is. And then the really funny thing, I think this has to be the highlight, humorous part of this anyway. Han Solo dresses 3PO up in Stormtrooper armor. And it's hilarious. You have to read it to get it. And it's brilliant. Yeah, so the next thing is Han actually infiltrates the building where Leia's being kept prisoner because she was arrested, and saves her, which is really cool. And I love the interactions between them when he gets there, which is page 233, where he says, well, Leia starts, she balled her fists on her hips. You found your way in. I don't suppose you've thought of a way of getting back out. Han says, not yet. And she rolled her eyes. Not again. Really cool little callback to A New Hope, when she basically, people should know that reference. And by now I had a pretty good idea of the Sea Rook. No, it's about 2/3 of the way through the novel, approximately. The proper explanations of the Sea Rook, because it sort of built up different aspects of what they look like over time. And their heads actually remind me, because they say they're beaked with teeth in the beaks. They actually remind me of the bad guys from the Dark Crystal. So they've got heads like, I think they're called the Quarks, but don't quote me on it, I can be corrected. I don't know the Dark Crystal that well, I have watched it though. And they remind me of that sort of bird-like head with the beak. But then they have a dinosaur-like reptilian body, is what I'll call it. And that's how I've imagined them. And I know I've seen some comics that have depicted them more as the head of being like the raptors and the dinosaurs as well, but that's how I've imagined them from the descriptions in the novel. I think using the humans as well, because they say more about how they're using the humans to power the control sections of the technology, because they still need to burn fuel and everything to run the engine and that. But it actually reminds me of the Matrix, how they explain it. It's like they want to control the humans and still breed the population and then just use them to control their technology, which is very similar to in the Matrix. Even the humans alive for the, well, they say it's the power in the movies, but never mind the theories, but they breed humans and keep them alive in the Matrix to produce power as well, which I see similarities there. And then Luke fighting Luke finally gets into full action and he fights the Sea Rook, which is awesome. And yeah, spoilers, of course, in my reviews. Page 261, Leia says that she hopes that the Falcon is fueled, which I take note of because of recent events and movies. They don't have it as an important plot point because the Falcon's fueled. Chewie did that. Chewie's good. Han and Chewie argue over mods to the Falcon though. It's funny, it ends up... Which page was it again? 262. On page 262, it's got a really hard thing to say. It says, as soon as we're out of here, he insisted, levelling a finger at Chewie. That goes back to specs. My specs. Because Chewie changed something in the Falcon and Han didn't like it. Which I thought was cool. Luke's actions on the Sea Ruby ship actually remind me of Harry Potter. So Sea Ruby is when something's of Sea Rook, make it Sea Ruby. So Luke got captured, but he's unconscious, and then he basically plays unconscious. Very much like Harry Potter when Harry played dead in the Deathly Hallows. In the movie it's part 2, but in the book it's just the Deathly Hallows. It's quite interesting. And makes sense. So then there's the whole end battle where they have parallel space scenes and with all the dog fighting in the Falcon and the tactical battles against the Sea Rook. And then you have a land portion and you also have Luke on the Sea Ruby ship, which really encapsulates the feel of Star Wars. It's very much like the space at the end of Return of the Jedi. You have the space battle over Endor, the Endor moon, I should say. You have Luke on the Death Star, and then you have the ground team on the Endor moon disabling the shield generator. It's very similar to running the 3 parallel lines like that, and it really does well at encapsulating the feel of Star Wars, I reckon. Especially in that moment, but the whole book does that, but when I feel that climax, it brings back really that excitement and the great things of why I love Star Wars, which is great. And the use of the bond between Leia and Luke near the end of that is great. And Luke's actually shows off how, because I mentioned the parasites earlier, he shows off how he can manipulate the Force in certain ways inside his own body, which is interesting. And yeah, it's the Carrack class Imperial cruiser that they actually call guiding it tugboating, which is the same as naval sea ships in real life. I know, probably naval sea is the same thing. Naval ships on the ocean and on the sea here in real life, they call tugboating as well, so it's interesting they use the same one. And on page 330, there's a prequel reference before the prequels were made. Luke says he's not forgetting the dominant. Even if it's not up to full capacity, we hold the high ground. It's over, Anakin. I have the high ground. So there you go. Obi-Wan has taught him well. And one of the major last points is that Luke and Gabriel Captisson kiss. So I would actually class Gabriel Captisson as Luke's first love interest after Leia. So Leia is a love interest from Splinter of the Mind's Eye especially, and before they knew they were siblings. And yeah, there's a whole thing of she likes him and he likes her at the end. And I'd class that as a love interest, even though it didn't go any further than a kiss. Overall, really enjoyed this, loving this great beginning to the post-Return of the Jedi era, and I'm keen for the next book. This is really exciting. Definitely a great read. Pick it up if you want to get into post-Return of the Jedi. It's a brilliant place to start. And next time, my next book is actually Luke Skywalker and the Shadows of Mindor. So I'm keen to get into this one as well. But for now, that will be that video. I hope you enjoyed hearing about the Truce At Bakura. If you haven't read it, then read it. Definitely recommend it. I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.